Welcome back to the School of Music Online and welcome to lesson 31. This is a lesson on serious chords. We're going to look at every single chord you're ever going to come across and how to play it. This lesson is so serious in fact that it obviously required its own title screen. And today it's battle conditions. We've actually got a family of birds that have decided to take up residence just outside a window to the studio. So if you don't mind, I don't mind. Anyway, I guess this lesson probably is going to deal with the most asked questions that piano students generally have, which is how to construct chords. So feel free to watch this video over and over again. You can keep coming back to it when you need to. There's really a lot of information in this one video to take away in one sitting. So we're going to show you how to figure out any chord that you come across. Maybe you've gotten to certain chords and you're just not quite sure how to attack them or what to do. There's quite literally thousands of different chord types and it can be a little daunting, but there's rules. I guess it's just like making a pizza. Once you know how to make a good base, you really can't go wrong after that. Okay, I can go wrong after that, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. Let's check out the base. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to work in C major. Chord symbols always make reference to the major scale, and let's face it, C is visually just a really easy key to look at and see any alterations that we make. Okay, so here's the 7 notes of the C major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now rather than playing all of those notes so close together, let's get some distance between them and spread them out. It's really important to notice that we're still playing the 7 notes of the major scale. We're just giving ourselves a little more room to breathe here. Okay, now with this numbering system it's getting a little confusing because we've lost that nice easy numerical order where it was all walking up. So let's walk up and rename some of these notes. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we'll just keep going up. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So you can see also that now we can differentiate between notes in different octaves. So for example, an A is a 13th when it's up here, but it's a 6th when it's down here, right? Okay, so now that we know where all the notes are, before we start figuring out some chords, let's break the chord up into sections and just have a look at how chords are constructed. Okay, so here's an example chord, a C minor 7 with a flat 5. Okay, now don't let this chord scare you. I want to show you a few things that'll clear it up. Firstly, the root. The root note is the very first thing you see in a chord. In this case, C. It tells us that we're going to build a minor 9th chord with a flattened 5th from the note C. Every chord has a root note first, and it could be one of 12 options, right? 12 notes, 12 possible root notes for our chords. The second part of the chord is the quality. In this case, we're told that it's a minor 7 chord. This could be one of 5 options. Can you hear that? I told you it was battle conditions today. They're building a house next door. It's a perfect time to do it. Anyway, the 5 options that it could be is a major 7, a minor 7, a dominant 7, which actually doesn't state major or minor before it, it just has the symbol 7, a diminished, or an augmented chord. Okay, so once again, don't let them intimidate you. At the moment, we're not focusing on the chords and how they're constructed, it's just how to figure out the symbols. Okay, so the next thing we look at are extensions. Okay, so these tell you that we're going to extend the chord out and what extra notes to add into the chord. The extensions aren't always written, but if they are, they're going to be either a 7, a 9, an 11, or a 13. Okay, so in this example it was just a C minor 7, but you can have those extra extensions. Okay, the last part of a chord is the alterations. Okay, so notice that we've broken the scale up and got numerical names for all of those white notes, right? But what if we want to add a note into the chord that isn't in the scale? So in C, for example, that's all the black notes. What if we want to add one of those into it? Okay, so this is where the alterations come in. So every other note, all these black notes, have a numerical name as well. In fact, some of them even have 2 names. The black notes are going to be a flat 9 or a sharp 9, a sharp 11 or a flat 5, and a sharp 5. Okay, we don't need to name that B flat, because if that note's going to be in the chord, it's because we're already playing it down here as a dominant chord, right? Okay, so I'm sure we're starting to shed a little light onto these chords. Let's start actually looking at some chords. Okay, so far through these lessons you've been playing major triads and minor triads. If the chord is just a major triad, then you don't need to put anything else after it. It's just going to be the root of the chord. If it's a minor triad, it's going to have a little m after it. You've also looked at the major 7 chord and the dominant 7 chord, both of which use the major triad at the bottom. And finally, we've also done our minor 7 chords. Now remember, that's 80% of the chords that you're ever going to come across, and shortly you'll understand how to get to the other 20%. And to be honest with you, I guess that other 20% shouldn't really seem like a giant mountain of practice, because most of them are just going to fall into place through playing songs. You can imagine if every new song that you pick up has a new chord to derive, then you're going to have a fairly large arsenal of chords at your disposal. My point is simply don't let me scare you, because once you understand it, then it's all just going to fall into place. Now, whether a chord is a major 7 chord, a dominant 7 chord, or a minor 7 chord, they all have the exact same extensions. So what I mean by that is the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th are exactly the same in all cases. This is really handy because when we're working out the chords, it all relates back to the major scale. So now, before we look at different extensions, I need to introduce you to a whole new type of chord first. It's my extreme pleasure to introduce you to the sus chord. No, that doesn't mean it's a little bit of a shifty chord that you shouldn't trust your children with. Sus is just short for suspended. So remember, in lesson 15, that basic improvising lesson, I was mentioning that tension notes had a tendency to rise or fall to a resolution note. Well, the sus note is the 4th, and in the sus chord we replace the 3rd with the 4th. So like this. So notice that the 4th is a tension note, and its closest resolution note is 1 semitone below, which is the E, as opposed to 1 tone above, which is the G. Sometimes the sus chord is called the Amen chord. It's a pretty typical chord to be heard on an organ near the end of a hymn. The symbol for a sus chord is just sus, S-U-S, and it always means that you replace the 3rd with the 4th. Okay, so now with that idea in mind, what notes do you think are in a C7 sus? Okay, so well, let's step through this. The root note is a C, the quality of the chord is a dominant 7 chord, so let's play that. And then it says sus. So what do? We just replace the 3rd with the 4th. So now we have a C dominant 7 chord with a suspended 4th. Easy, huh? Okay, so by the way, you won't ever see a 3rd and a 4th in the same chord, unless you're playing some really modern piece of music where the composer has specifically written that in to the music, and in that case he's actually going to have to make up a whole new chord symbol for it. But just generally, you won't ever see a 3rd and a 4th in the same chord. Okay, so let's take a look at another 2 expressions that you can use in your chord symbols to change them. The first one is add. You can put this after a chord and then specify which note you want to add in. For example, C add 9. It's just a C major triad. Notice that there's no quality of chord marked after it. So it's just a C triad, a C major triad. But the specific instructions are we're being told to add a 9th into it. Right? So what about a C minor 7, add 11? Well, here's our C minor 7. Remember, a minor 7 has a flat 3 and a flat 7. Then the specific instructions are just to add the 11th. So that's the add expression. So what if you want to get rid of certain notes? What if you want to omit them completely from being played? Okay, so that expression is just omit. Easy, huh? Let's try one. For example, a C major 7, omit 3. So here's a C major 7, and we just take away the 3rd. So here it is. Okay, so just to recap on what we've looked at so far, we know that all chords consist of the root, the quality, extensions, and alterations. I should say that they always consist of the root, but the other things they can consist of are quality, extensions, and alterations. The three new things we've added in so far are sus chords and the expressions add and omit. It's all pretty straightforward so far. So now let's take a look at these extensions. Now what if the chord read C major 9? So now we have the ninth as an extension. So the 9 assumes that the major 7 is in there too. So here's a major 7 and here's a major 9. Notice that the 7th doesn't get dropped. That's really important. Okay, so what about a C minor 9? Okay, once again, here's a C minor 7 and here's a C minor 9. So we keep the 7. That's really important. Okay, so what about a C9? So here's a C dominant 7. Okay, and here's a C dominant 9. I guess it's a bit like building blocks with these extensions. You need to have the other notes under it to hold it up. If you only wanted the ninth, then you just say C add 9, right? So with this building block thing in mind, let's look at a C minor 7. And now let's turn it into a C minor 9. Yeah, right, okay, so now let's turn it into a C minor 11. Notice that we keep the 7 and the 9 in there. And finally, let's turn it into a C minor 13. So you see what I mean about those building blocks. Now remember too that I said that a fourth and a third can never be in the same chord. Well, this 11 is essentially a fourth up the octave, right? But the reason that we get away with it is because here the 3 is actually a flat 3. Listen to the dissonance if we only have one semitone between them. So we've got a third, major third, and the fourth. Really dissonant, right? But if it's a minor chord, we've got a flat 3. It's a lot less dissonant than that. So we can get away with it if there's a whole tone between them. Okay, so let's do a C major 7. Now we'll extend it out to a C major 9. Now we know now that there can be no such thing as a C major 11 because we can't have the third and the fourth in the same chord. So the next one would be a C major 13. And to finish off extensions, let's do a C7. We'll extend it out to a C9. Once again, in dominant chords, there can be no such thing as a C11, like a C dominant 11. So the next one would be a C13. And as you can see in this one again, we keep the 7 and the 9 in there. Okay, so let's have a little bit of revision. We'll have a small game of beat the clock. So here we go, round 1. What notes are in a C minor 13? What notes are in a C minor 7, add 13? What notes are in a C sus? What notes are in a C7 sus? Okay, and finally, the hardest one so far, what notes are in a C, add 9, omit 3? Okay, seriously, they were tough. I'm sure you did fine though. We'll have round 2 at the end where we start getting the really serious chords. So the final thing that we need to look at is alterations. Alterations are just extra specific instructions. They're also written in the parentheses, just like the add and omit, which are also forms of alterations. Okay, they're going to make a chord look incredibly intimidating and scary, but it's going to be an extreme walk in the park for you after that, let me assure you. Okay, so let's look at this incredibly scary chord. Remind me to get them to edit in some reverb and echo on that. Okay, so C minor 7 with a flat 5. This was also the very first chord that we brought up to talk about the root, quality, extensions and alterations. I'm sure that it's not so scary now. Okay, so let's start by getting our C minor 7. So there's our C minor 7. Now the alterations for this chord are simply telling us just to change the 5 into a flat 5. So we flatten this 5th, and there we are. That's a C minor 7 with a flat 5. Alterations really aren't that hard, are they? Okay, so what about a C9 with a sharp 5? So we want a C dominant chord up to the 9th, because that's the extension. And the alterations are just simply sharpening the 5th. Okay, so what about a C7 with a flat 9 and a flat 5? Okay, so we get our C7 chord. And now the alterations are, here's a flat 9, and here's the flat 5, sorry. So in this case, an alteration has actually instructed us to add in an altered note. This can happen too. It doesn't have to be used through that add symbol. It can be just thrown into the alteration there. Another example of that happening would be in a C major 13 with a sharp 11. This is probably the scariest chord we've looked at so far. So here's a C major 7. We extend it up to the 9. It can't be an 11 because of the 3. You can't have the 3rd and the 4th in there, so we extend it up to the 13, and there's our C major 13. And the alteration is just telling us to add a sharp 11 into it. So there's a C major 13 with a sharp 11. Okay, so you've probably figured out now that alterations just aren't that scary. And I hope your chords are making a little more sense now. Once again, I have to point out that these chords are seriously the toughest of the tough. You're generally not going to come across them, and if you do, it's certainly not going to be one after the other in succession like this. And generally, your ability to play these chords is going to come from having to nut them out in tunes as you come across them. Over a period of years, they're going to start falling into place. You're certainly not going to be expected to know every single one of them off by heart in every key. So, I guess, as I promised, let's dig into round 2. So what we're going to do is a series of 10 chords for you to work out. These are going to be the toughest that I can muster up. And stick around, because after round 2, what I'm going to do is go through some final things to watch out for, and a few rare chord symbols that you're probably going to come across in your travels every now and again. So here we go, round 2. So what notes are in a C9 with a sharp 5? What notes are in a C7 with a flat 9 and a flat 5? What notes are in a C7 sus? What notes are in a C minor 13? What notes are in a C minor 11 with a flat 5? What notes are in a C13 with a flat 5? What notes are in a C add 9? What notes are in a C major 7 with a flat 5? What notes are in a C major 7 add 13? Okay, and finally, the granddaddy of all chords. What notes are in a C minor 7, add 11, omit 5? So well done, I'm sure you did great. Now attached to this lesson is a test in PDF format, so it's really great if you're after just a little more practice. After this video, open it up and print it off. It'll really put what you've learned in this lesson to the test. And now the answer sheet is in a separate PDF, so make sure that you don't open it up by mistake until you've taken the test. So now before I go, I want to show you 4 little things that you'll probably come across in your chord adventures. So firstly is an augmented chord. The chord symbol for this is just aug, A-U-G, or a plus symbol. An augmented chord is a major triad with a sharp 5 instead of a normal 5. So this is a pretty rare chord to come across, but you will come across it, so it's good to know. Secondly, here's one that's not so rare. The diminished chord has a symbol dim, D-I-M, or a superscript circle. The diminished chord is like a major triad, but the 3rd and the 5th have been flattened or diminished. So a C diminished has the notes C, E flat, which is a flat 3, and G flat, which is a flat 5. So notice, this is the important bit, that this chord only consists of minor 3rd intervals. So with that in mind, if you wanted to thicken this chord up, what note could you build onto the top of it? Well, let's build another minor 3rd up from that G flat. Now the G flat would be, minor 3rd up would be an A. So this chord is called a C diminished 7. Now understand that the A doesn't relate back to the major scale. This is the only chord that isn't going to be derived from the major scale. The 7th in a diminished 7 actually comes from an entirely different scale. The easiest thing to take on board and the most important thing is that every single interval is a minor 3rd, and this is actually why a diminished 7 can never have any other extensions built on top of it, because if you built another minor 3rd on top of it, you'd just be back to C again. Thirdly, let me introduce you to the 6-9 chord. It could just be written as C, add 6, add 9. Basically, you just add those 2 notes onto the triad. It's one type of chord that's just become so regularly used that over time, I guess, it's just become the 6-9 chord. So for example, a C minor 6-9 would just be this. Lastly, and I think this is the last thing, I want to touch on a thing called slash chords. Slash chords just look like a chord symbol, but they have a / to the lower right, and then a different root note. That second note will never be a chord. It can only be a single note. And what this tells us, that in our right hand, we're going to be playing a C major 7, and in our left hand, we'd just play the single note D. So it's indicating what note is in the bass. If we were playing with a bass player, then the bass player would play the D. So why would we ever have a need for that, you might ask? Well, basically, no matter how good you get, big extensions and alterations can be just harder to read on the fly, especially if it's a faster tempo or if it's a gig and you haven't had a chance to practice the material. So the chord C major 7 over D could also be written as D13 sus, but I'm sure anybody would be more familiar with a C major 7. So just changing the bass note is going to have exactly the same effect and possibly create a lot less chaos on the bandstand. So that's slash chords. So just quickly, here is everything that we've covered in this video lesson. It's a big video lesson. Here's everything we've looked at. Root notes, the quality of chords, extensions, alterations, sus chords, augmented chords, diminished chords, 6-9 chords, the 6-9 chord, and finally slash chords. I'm really glad I could shed a little light on some of these serious chords for you. There's absolutely no doubt it's a huge lesson, and if you need to come back and watch this video 50 times, then feel free. I'm sure every time you do, something else is going to click into place. Please remember though that now that you know how to create the chords, I don't think it's a great idea that you go away and master every single one of them before you move on. I've seriously seen pianists lose years of their musical progression because they've been doing that. And I really think it's much more beneficial to attack them as you encounter them, or to practice them in a musical context. I've also found that each time you come across a serious chord and nut it out, it tends to speed up the amount of time you need to find another serious chord. Anyway, understanding them is the absolute first step. So feel free to download the test and see how you do on your own. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video lesson.